Hello everyone, and welcome back to another video. It is a beautiful June morning in the Southern California desert and a perfect way to start our day just outside of Palm Springs. The town is still fast asleep at this hour, but Union Pacific is wide awake, and in just a few minutes a train arrives heading west. This massive train of international shipping containers is heading to the even larger port of Los Angeles to be loaded onto ships heading across the world. Today, we will be exploring Union Pacific's Yuma and Gila subdivisions, which make up the western portion of the famous former Southern Pacific Sunset Route. Completed in 1883, the Mainline across the Southwestern Desert to Texas and eventually the Southeast is one of Union Pacific's busiest, with over 30 trains, many over 2 miles in length, traversing the rails every day. From transcontinental intermodal trains to slow-moving manifests, the Sunset Route has a lot to offer. The stretch of track we will follow between Palm Springs and Tucson, Arizona, offers some stunning views from the shores of the Salton Sea to the heart of cactus country in the Sonoran Desert. This first intermodal train is being powered by 3 locomotives in the latest rendition of Union Pacific's flagless paint scheme, with the company reverting back to their look of the 1990s. Fittingly, many of the first units to receive this scheme are rebuilt AC 4400 CWs, many of which wore the earlier rendition of the scheme years ago when they were delivered. After years of looking run down, they look sharp again, pulling freight across Southern California. Palm Springs is a large resort town, but as you continue east of there, things get desolate quick. Passing through the towns of Indio, Coachella, which is home to the famous music festival, and Thermal, civilization becomes thinner and thinner until just the road, the tracks, and tiny homesteads remain as we reach the banks of the Salton Sea east of Mecca, California. For about 25 miles, the Yuma sub hugs the Salton Sea, a highly saline 318 square mile lake in the middle of the desert. The present-day Salton Sea occupies the Salton Basin, with different lakes having occupied the basin throughout history, the most recent being Lake Kauai, which dried up about 300 years ago. In the first decade of the 20th century, irrigation canals from the Colorado River overflooded and rushed into the Imperial Valley. By the time the breach that caused the flooding was closed, the Salton Sea had formed. Today, the Salton Sea is still maintained in large part by agricultural runoff from irrigation in the Imperial and Coachella valleys, and still provides a great backdrop for trains like this eastbound racing out of Los Angeles with containers fresh off the boat from Asia. As is typical on many railroads in 2025, two mid-train DPUs split this 2-mile-long consist of international shipping containers, providing extra power for the trip east. It appears that the dockside intermodal trains in particular on Union Pacific are some of the longest trains that they run. As the intermodal train passed, a westbound manifest was picking up a car in the siding 2 miles east of our location. In just a few minutes, the crew had finished their work and departed, heading for Union Pacific's massive classification yard at West Colton, California. Engine number 7331 is classified as a C44 ACM rebuild, just like so many other units on UP's roster, but instead of being rebuilt from a standard AC4400 CW, this unit was rebuilt from what was initially an AC6000 CW. These massive 6,000 horsepower units proved to be a failure, but UP still made good use of them, downgrading their engines to the 4,400 horsepower version that was standard on AC-44 CWs and giving them the designation of AC-4460 CW. Today, many have been rebuilt and continue to operate, making for a nice, unique sight of a unit not seen on any other Class 1 railroads. After the El Paso cleared, we continued east to Bertram Siding. A small memorial commemorates a tragedy that occurred here in the early hours of September 8, 2022, when an engineer and conductor were killed after their train was routed into the siding and struck a string of stored railcars. The track circuit in the siding had degraded, giving the dispatching computer system a false reading that the siding was clear. We paid our respects and then left Bertram behind, continuing to drive through the desolate California desert. Many of the towns in Imperial County have little evidence of population and sit in ruins, making them unique places to drive through. Some, however, are still home to farming communities, such as Nyland, which has some Old West character in and of itself. Imperial County is so interesting to pass through, as one minute you'll be driving through miles of green crop fields before being smack dab in the middle of desolate desert sand once again. Moving towards Arizona, the landscape became more like the latter as we arrived in Oglebay, California, a ghost town once serving as a mining community. There is nothing here now except the Yuma sub, and a lit signal told us we had a westbound on the way. Next through the desert was more LA-bound dockside intermodal traffic. The volume of these types of trains speaks numbers about the size of the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach, which in July of 2025 handled a combined 1,964,069 TEUs, or 20-foot equivalent containers. The two ports combined to make up what is far and away the biggest container port in the United States. As is the common practice in precision scheduled railroading, a small block of domestic containers brings up the rear of this 2-mile-long monster. They will be dropped at one of Union Pacific's own intermodal terminals before the rest of the consist is forwarded to the port. Our next stop at about 20 more miles is Yuma, Arizona. Famous for its old western prison and located along the Colorado River, the town sits right near the U.S.-Mexico border. Yuma is a Union Pacific division point where trains recrew for the trip to either Los Angeles or Tucson. Bordering Yuma on the California side of the Colorado River, the town of Winter Haven is where we catch our next Union Pacific action as yet another port-bound stacker throttles up to track speed heading out of a crew change. We decided to chase the train back west to the outskirts of Winter Haven for a wide-angle shot. The wide-open desert landscape makes for some nice pacing shots as the train gets up to speed. Most of these 2-mile-long dockside intermodal trains utilize 4 engines spread throughout the consist to operate over the Yuma sub, and all of that horsepower will be needed to get the train up and over the 2% grade at Beaumont Hill as they approach the LA Basin. As the stack train heads west, we push into Arizona, quickly bypassing Yuma and pushing into the Southwestern Desert. The Sunset Route is now running as the Union Pacific Gila Subdivision for about 250 miles from Yuma to Tucson. This stretch cuts through some incredible desert scenery and remained busy throughout the day. Arriving first in the town of Welton was a westbound manifest train breaking up the intermodal parade with a 4-pack of Union Pacific's finest providing power. Southwestern Arizona is a desolate place. Depending on where you are generally driving on either a small 2-lane road or Interstate 8, usually within sight of the former Southern Pacific tracks that the roads were built alongside. This does make for a good spot to chase trains, and we soon encounter a fast-moving Z train heading for LA. A quick turnaround on I-8 at the nearest exit, and we are in a 70-mile-per-hour chase with UP 9575 West, a freshly rebuilt Dash 9 pulling 10,000 feet of priority double stacks. Originally built for the Southern Pacific, 9575 was right at home here in southern Arizona and looked incredible in its recently applied third paint scheme. Right behind the Z train was another westbound, this time an autorack job with 3 engines spread throughout the consist. Much of the Sunset Route is rifle straight, which allows for high-speed running. We get a look at that characteristic here as you can see the headlight of an eastbound train, which we will see later, miles in the distance as the Autoracks head towards Yuma. For the next 60 miles between Mohawk and Gila Bend, Interstate 8 and the railroad are pretty much all that is out here, save for some tiny towns scattered along the highway. There's plenty of train action though, and in just a few miles we have to pull over for more containers heading west. Since the UP-SP merger in 1996, the Sunset Route has experienced an extreme level of traffic growth. From just over 30 trains per day in 1998, the line reached a peak of 55 daily trains in 2015 before the number once again decreased into the 30s with the advent of precision scheduled railroading virtually doubling the size of the American freight train. The post-merger traffic growth spurring from investment in upgrading track infrastructure has extensively impacted the Sunset Route as the once single-track Mainline has been 80% double-tracked between El Paso and Los Angeles with work in progress to complete the final 120 miles of single-track underway. Much of the traffic growth along the Sunset Route has come in the form of double-stacked intermodal trains, and 2 more of them were in line to come west. Keeping on Interstate 8, soon enough the unmistakable sight of 3 big yellow GEs came into view, bisecting the emptiness of the Sonoran Desert. It is incredible to think that way back in the 1880s, this rail line was constructed in such a remote and unforgiving environment, connecting this inhospitable place to civilization for the first time. Since then, major cities have grown up across the Southwestern Desert from Phoenix to Tucson. But out here, little has changed save for the construction of this interstate and the growth of trains to 2-mile-long monsters connecting the country's biggest cities. Not far behind is the second stack train making its way west as we pull off the highway in Piedra. In a few more miles, we pass through the town of Gila Bend, Arizona. The rails surrounding this town make up a portion of the remaining single-track section of the Sunset Route. 2 eastbounds had been holding for the high-priority stack trains that we had just seen and were now lumbering along east of town as they get back up to speed. The first train we encounter is this empty grain train pulling towards the Cactus Desert. And just a couple of signal blocks ahead of the grain train and surrounded by saguaro cacti, a mixed freight is negotiating the curves through Shawmut, Arizona as it makes its way towards Tucson.
Sharp right.
We get ahead of both trains at Estrella, the start of the double track that runs all the way into Tucson. The drone provides a great view of the scenic desert landscape as UP number 8798 crosses onto the South Main for the 110-mile sprint down the rest of the Gila subdivision. The drone gives us a better idea of just how long these PSR-era freight trains are. This single manifest would have once been at least 2 different trains, but now all traffic has been combined into this 2-mile-long monster with a mid-train DPU that takes over 4 minutes to pass us. I am unsure of this train's final destination, but it will almost certainly drop some of these cars in Tucson before heading to points east in Texas and beyond. to manifest was our eastbound empty grain train at much more reasonable level. This section of the Sunset Route is renowned for its desert scenery, and no place encompasses this better than Shawmut. Located off a dirt road, the railroad cuts through a large patch of cacti, making for an absolutely classic Arizona scene. Just a few minutes after we pulled in, an eastbound Z train arrives with 5 UP motors wide open as they pull their high-priority train around the tight curves. Once they reach Estrella in a few more miles, the engineer will let the horses run, and this will become the fastest train on the subdivision. Leaving the rural desert, we followed the railroad into the more populated areas in Maricopa County as the Sunset Route continues towards Tucson as a double-track mainline. The county's namesake town of Maricopa is the first real large population center along the entire Gila subdivision east of Yuma, and a fairly steady flow of towns accompany the railroad the rest of the way into Tucson. About 20 miles southeast of Maricopa is the town of Casa Grande, where we find an awesome artifact of this region's history. Union Pacific number 1053 and EMD GP60, still wearing its original Southern Pacific speed lettering paint scheme, was part of the Casa Grande local power set on this day. Built in 1991 as SP number 9759, this unit is hands down the most well-kept former SP engine that I have ever seen, and catching it on Southern Pacific's most famous mainline in 2025 was a real treat. These 4 Jeeps are tasked with switching local industries but had no work on this day, and so they sat basking under the desert sun. Making things better, in a few minutes a westbound international stack train arrived, making for a nice, now and then, side-by-side with UP Gevos overtaking the old SP GP60. In the 1990s, GP60s were commonly found pulling intermodal trains like this one across the western United States on both the Southern Pacific and the Santa Fe. Now, 35 years later, the engine is enjoying a much more laid-back task in its mainline retirement, leaving the heavy hauling to the new 4,400 horsepower GEs. After a brief dive into history, we continued east as the sun got lower and lower in the sky, paralleling the UP Main the whole way. Our next stop was Waimola, where we came upon a railroad traffic jam. Stopped waiting to head west was a short-haul manifest train, holding for the grain empties that we saw earlier. The conditions worked out perfectly to make for a beautiful sunset shot along the rail line that is named for such scenes. After the grain train crossed over, the EMD-led short-haul manifest got the signal to proceed westbound. Trailing right behind the head-end power on this train was another relic of this line's history in the form of a Southern Pacific caboose still bearing the former owner's name. Daylight quickly faded as we made the final trek into Tucson. We passed a couple more trains along the way as we drove down the I-10 frontage road before arriving into the Tucson suburbs just after nightfall. Before calling it a day, we drove past one more train that warranted a stop. At milepost 975, we pulled off of the interstate to set up for another eastbound manifest that we had overtaken with yet another Southern Pacific painted engine trailing second. UP number 6378 is an AC 4400 CW and still proudly wears the SP name on the side of its long hood as it rolled down the right-of-way that it once called home. To complete our final scene of the evening, the grain train that we had seen already twice before overtook the manifest on the far track. The next day, we were back out trackside for a few hours to conclude our time on the Sunset route west of Tucson. Unfortunately, my external microphone had issues and all of the audio for these clips was unusable. So, I will show them quickly here as I wrap up the video. The first action of the day was an eastbound intermodal with 2 rebuilt AC 4400s up front and 2 more units serving as mid-train DPUs on this monster consist. Once again, behind a small cut of domestic containers, most of this consist was international boxes fresh off the boat from the port of Los Angeles and Long Beach. Coming the other direction in just a few minutes is a Priority Z train bound for the LA area with 4 GEs up front for power. And not long after, another Z train comes into the picture, this time heading eastbound towards Tucson with a 4-pack leading yet again. The following eastbound was of much lower priority as 2 GEs lugged a long mixed freight through Waimola. And finally, to end the day, we caught up with one more international stack train at the Scenic Curves in Shawmut, Arizona. The Southwestern Desert is both one of the most unique and unforgiving places in the United States. Just over 240 years ago, the Southern Pacific Railroad cut through this remote landscape, connecting it with the rest of the growing country and allowing for a population to develop in a remote and unsustainable place. In 2025, the former SP remains one of the most important freight railroads in the country, and every day Union Pacific helps keep American commerce flowing as they traverse the dry and hot landscape. I hope you enjoyed this brief tour of the Sunset Route, and I thank you for watching.